Fall is my favorite time of the year, and October is my favorite month, and watching horror movies is always on my list of things to do. I prefer to watch Halloween-themed movies in October like The Witching Season, The Terror of Hallows Eve, Hayride, almost anything involving scarecrows, and Halloween 1, 2, and 3. And I also love the Medea movies too. But speaking of horror movies, have you seen Halloween 2, the one from 1981? Well, I was recently watching it and there's a scene that inspired me to make this video. It's the scene where Dr. Loomis and the police are called to investigate a break-in at an elementary school. Michael had broken into the school and wrote the word Samhain on the blackboard of a classroom in blood. Dr. Loomis tells the officers that the word is Celtic and that it means the end of summer. Then there's Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. You have an Irish toymaker, Cochrane, and he wants to return Samhain to its supposedly bloody roots by planning a mass sacrifice of children using costume masks with microchips in them that contain a fragment of Stonehenge that Cochrane stole. Now, Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers, introduces the Curse of Thorn and the Cult of Thorn, which is an ancient druid curse that Michael Myers is controlled by. The curse is placed on a single member of a family who is then forced to murder their family members as a blood sacrifice on Samhain. They do this to preserve their society and to keep their tribes alive. Michael hears voices, and that is what makes him kill, according to this particular installment anyway. The cult protects him, but it also gave him the Curse of Thorn. Most people don't like Halloween 6 in the franchise because it takes the mystery out of Michael Myers. But what exactly is Samhain, and how did this Celtic festival morph into what we know as Halloween today? Samhain simply means end of summer, and it's celebrated from October 31st to November the 1st. It's part of a pagan Celtic spiritual tradition that marks the end of summer, welcoming in the harvest and bringing in the darker half of the year. It's also the end of the Celtic year and is known as the Witch's New Year. The Celtic year was divided into two halves, light and dark. Samhain is also when the boundaries of this world and the spirit world break down, and it allows the physical and spiritual world to interact. The normal order of things was suspended during that time, and altered states were both possible and expected. During Samhain, the living could visit with the dead who they believed knew secrets of the future. During what was known as the Feast of the Dead, food was prepared for both the living and the dead. Children would play games to entertain the dead, while adults would update the dead on the past year's news. That night, doors and windows might be left open for the dead to come in and eat cakes that had been left for them. Huge bonfires were built that were known as bone fires because the bones from the feasts were thrown into this fire. Villagers would then take the fire back to their homes and light their hearths from the bonfires to symbolize unity. The ashes were taken the following morning and symbolically spread on the land for the fruitfulness of crops. All Saints' Day, or All Hallows, was celebrated on November the 1st, and it commemorated Christian saints and martyrs. In the 800s AD, All Saints' Day became the festival to honor any saint who didn't already have a day of his or her own. The Mass, which was said on this day, was known as All Hallows, the Mass of all those who are hallowed. The night before Halloween became known as All Hallows Even, and eventually All Hallows Eve, which over time became Halloween. All Hallows Day was officially switched to November the 1st by Pope Gregory IV, and it's believed that the Christian Church moved the date to match with the Celtic holiday to promote Christianity more easily in previously pagan areas. By the end of the 12th century, these 3 days became holy days of obligation across Europe, and it included ringing church bells for the souls of those that were in purgatory. It would also be customary for criers dressed in black to parade the streets, ringing mourning bells and calling on all good Christians to remember the poor souls. Souling was the custom of baking and sharing soul cakes for all Christian souls. Groups of poor people, often children, would go door to door and they would collect soul cakes in exchange for praying for the dead, especially the souls of the giver's family. This tradition of souling is thought to be the origin of modern trick-or-treat. In England and Ireland, during All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day celebrations, poor people would visit the houses of wealthier families and they would receive pastries called soul cakes. During World War II, sugar was rationed, but after World War II, sugar no longer needed to be rationed, so candy companies nationwide capitalized on this lucrative holiday. While the fears about poisoned candy were exaggerated, poisonings did occur, with the most infamous case taking place on Halloween night in 1974. In Texas, a man named Ronald Clark O'Brien gave cyanide-laced pixie sticks to 5 children, including his son and his daughter. The only child that ate the candy was his 8-year-old son, Timothy. And before Timothy died, he suffered. It's a horrific crime. But Ronald Clark O'Brien was sentenced to death, and he's no longer with us. During the Tylenol murders of the early 80s, warnings about tampered Halloween candy increased. Today, Americans spend an estimated $3.1 billion on Halloween candy, according to the National Retail Federation. The day itself has become our second largest commercial holiday. Now let's talk about bats and why they're associated with the holiday. The massive bonfires that I mentioned a few minutes ago had something to do with this. The light from the fire attracted swarms of insects at night, which in turn attracted the bats. Bats tend to swarm from September to November when they're looking for mates, and they are also increasing their food intake because they're preparing for winter hibernation. Christianity also influenced the way bats were viewed during the Middle Ages, and in the Bible, the bat is depicted as an unclean animal that is unfit for consumption. Dante's Inferno, which was written in the 14th century, solidified bats as an allegory for the devil when he described devil wings as looking similar to those of a bat. Bats were also linked with witchcraft, which was obviously punishable by death many years ago. In 1332, a French noblewoman, Lady Bayonne, was burned to death simply because crowds of bats hung out in her garden. In reality, those bats were probably just after the insects that were drawn to her flowers. And William Shakespeare also equated bats with witches' spells and curses. When it comes to the tradition of wearing costumes, the young men in the villages would put on terrifying masks, or they would blacken their faces before leaving home. They were trying to hide their face to avoid being recognized and taken away by the slua. Slua means host in Irish. They were the most feared of the faithful, more feared than even death itself. Sometimes they would have large wings, or they would shapeshift into horrific-looking birds. When in their human form, they appeared haggard and old. Their skin sagged, and it seemed to almost fall off the bone. Their arms and legs were long and gangly, and they ended in sharp nails. Their leathery wings give them the appearance of wearing a cape or a cloak when they aren't using them. Slua are said to be the manifestation of the wild hunt. The wild hunt is usually described as menacing, chaotic, overwhelming, and maybe even a forewarning to a great catastrophe. It was a ghostly procession formed from the darkest, most vile creatures imaginable, and they're especially powerful during Samhain. They would fly through the night sky accompanied by Odin's ravens. Odin was the Norse god of the wind and the dead. They would also kidnap people and take them into the earth, or dropping them from great heights to kill them. Some considered them to be fallen angels, while others believed that they were the unforgiven dead. When a person was close to death, the doors and the windows on the west side of the house had to be secured to keep them out. Now, in 1911, Walter Evans Wentz published the story of a boy that was said to have been taken by the slua. His body was found the next day at the back of a house. It had been dropped from a great height. So the supernatural in this case was more than likely used to conceal a hideous crime that was committed to a child. The traditional Halloween colors of black and orange also trace back to the Celtic festival of Samhain. For the Celts, black represented darkness and the death of summer, while orange represented the warmth and abundance of the harvest season. with regards to black cats. The fears surrounding them and their association with witches came from the Puritan colonists. They believed witches could turn into their familiar. Familiars attended or helped a witch and were said to have been given to them by the devil or inherited from another witch. They could take on almost any animal shape, like a toad, a dog, an insect, or a black cat. The association of black cats and witches likely stemmed from those accused of witchcraft simply having cats as pets. Written records link black cats to the occult as far back as the 13th century. In an official church document issued by Pope Gregory IX on June 13, 1233, it noted that black cats were declared an incarnation of Satan. Cats are also nocturnal, and they roam around at night, which led to the belief that they were supernatural servants to witches. This belief caused many of them to be killed during the Black Death, even though the cats were actually helping to kill the rats that spread the plague. One creature that haunted the highlands at night during Samhain was the cat she from Celtic mythology. It was believed to be a fairy or a witch in disguise. The witch, it was said, could turn into a black cat and then back again 9 times. However, on the 9th time, they would remain a cat forever. And this is where the belief that cats have 9 lives originated. The cat sheet was black all over, except for a white spot on its chest. And in Scotland, it was thought that there was a number of cat she who would attempt to steal the souls of the dead. And corpses were guarded both day and night to prevent them or any black cat from passing over them before the funeral. It was also believed that if you left a saucer of milk out for the fairy on Samhain, it would bless your house. If you didn't leave a saucer, your cows would be cursed and their milk would run dry. The practice of carving faces into hollowed-out turnips or potatoes became associated with Halloween in Ireland and Scotland around the 1800s. Immigrants brought the jack-o'-lantern tradition with them when they came to the United States, but they soon found out that pumpkins, which is a native fruit to America, make better jack-o'-lanterns. Jack-o'-lanterns originated from an Irish myth about a man nicknamed Stingy Jack who tricked the devil and was forced to roam the earth with only a burning coal and a turnip to light his way. The name jack-o'-lantern comes from the lore regarding Stingy Jack. Eventually, people began to make their own versions of Jack's lanterns by carving scary faces onto the hollowed-out turnips, potatoes, or pumpkins and placing them in windows or near doors to frighten away Stingy Jack or any other wandering evil spirit. Bobbing for apples has been around since the colonial era in America and was used for divination. The first person to pluck an apple from a bucket of water without using their hands would be the first to marry, it's said. Other lore says that if a girl peeled an apple into a long ribbon and then she threw it, it would be in the shape of her future spouse's first initial. Divinations that didn't involve apples would have a person standing in front of a mirror at midnight on Halloween, and it was said that the face of the person's future spouse would appear over their shoulder. In the late 1800s, on All Hallows Eve, common Halloween pranks or tricks included putting farmers' wagons and livestock on barn roofs or pulling up the vegetables in gardens and tipping over outhouses. The night became known as Mischief Night or Devil's Night. But leading up to the Great Depression, Halloween had become a time when young men could vent their frustrations and blow off some steam while they were also causing mischief. Sometimes they would go too far. In 1933, when hundreds of teenage boys flipped over cars, sawed off telephone poles, and engaged in other acts of vandalism across the country, parents became so concerned that they organized haunted houses to keep them occupied and out of the streets.